Muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Sean cordialmente bienvenidos a
Good
la
morning
conferencia
to all. Welcome to the RCM session. It's 10:10 in Mexico City on June 25th, 2011. Please remember that we have interpretation, so you can choose the language on the bottom of the screen. We also ask you to close your mics when you are not taking the floor.
adecuado de la
And
información,
as per
publicación
policy
y
on
manejo de
proper
contenido.
use of information, content, and publications in social media and others, any reproduction or dissemination of the content in whole or in part, in any means, live or recorded, is prohibited. For the information is the property of the member countries of the RCM, so any request for reproduction must be addressed through the Executive Secretariat of the RCM. This is the third session on the regional workshops on policy strengthening for non-discrimination, evaluation of use of force, and assisted return. Today, we are going to talk about assisted return within the context of the crisis. We are going to give the floor to Marco Antonio Freire. He is from the Secretariat of Foreign Affairs for Central America and the Caribbean, and he's going to be talking about on behalf of the PPT. You have the floor. Marco, your microphone is closed.
Perdón, Víctor, sí, estaba ensayando a ver si podía poner a prueba sus habilidades para leerlo.
Yes, I was. Thank you, my friend, Marco Antonio Freire. So, Director for Regional Migration for Latin America and the Caribbean of the Secretariat of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. On behalf of our General Director, I am pleased to welcome you all to this third session where we will finish our review, our public policy, inclusion, non-discrimination, use of force, and finally, we will see assisted return within the context of a crisis. I would like to thank the IOM and the International Committee of the Red Cross for their important support for this particular workshop. This reflects the commitment they have to continue strengthening and capacity building of the RCM and migration management, not only at the regional level, but to create suitable conditions for regional migration management. And we have the policy unit of the Secretariat of the Interior of Mexico. And of course, we have seen their commitment and the results with these workshops. I'm going to try to be brief, and I would like to thank all the participants. I would like to highlight that since Mexico was to hold the PPT, this was going to be a period based on clear premises that would provide a roadmap for the activities to follow. And they were addressed in action guidelines, and we want to a framework of migration, governance, and human rights for migration with inclusion, which is our motto. And I think that this session captures the meaning of this slogan. We are including migrants as the center and of all policies, and of course the respect of human rights as the central axis. And this concept of inclusion to reference and make visible all these segments of the migrant population that sometimes are overlooked and who may be in more vulnerable situations,
indígena,
as well as other populations such as indigenous population, LGBTIQ, or people with disabilities. And it has been very important. And this will allow states or countries to continue working on non-discrimination regardless of the characteristics of the population they assist. And we have to make sure that the premises that has to be maintained is the respect for human rights and dignity of migrants. And it is an aspect that, dependent on the focus or the approach, sometimes we need a greater discussion. And we usually try to call them a voluntary assisted return, which could be sometimes in question. And in Mexico, and we have seen a lot of people also asking for the return to the country, which also would qualify under this. And to have a greater understanding or allow us to have certain policies or recommendation regarding in the current context, especially when we're talking about migration that usually goes to the US through our country. And to be able to have a proper dimension of this process. And this has to be part of migration management, of what we are going to do with the people who are, for example, being assisted or who are not being able to benefit from what the legal frameworks provide. So we need agile and safe processes that guarantee return to the countries of origin when we're talking about return in a decent fashion, dignified fashion, while observing, of course, all the aspects to guarantee that these people who are returned to the countries of origin do so in a suitable manner. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to all who are participating, and you have the floor. Thank you for your words, Marco, on behalf of the PPT. Today's session is facilitated by the IOM. So Rosalind Bourne is going to talk on behalf of them. She's a senior regional officer of the Regional Office for North America and the Caribbean. Rose, you have the floor. Morning, Luis Alonso, and to all delegations. And you are going to hear me in this section soon enough. But on behalf of the IOM, I would like to thank you for your participation We are committed to working with the member countries to ensure the protection of migrants and safe, dignified, assisted returns is a component. So we are looking forward to the discussions today, and we are sure they're going to be most useful for you, especially during these times of crisis. Thank you very much for your participation. And Luis Alonso, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Rose, y también a Marco, nuevamente por
And
la
Marco,
invitación.
Rose, thank you very much.
Para introducir el taller y sobre todo en las
And
talleres que hemos tenido en los últimos
just for the
2 días de
previous
presentaciones, me complace pasar la
workshops,
palabra a
I'm
Gustavo
going to give
Pineda
the floor
Pineda. Él es el
to
coordinador
Gustavo
de
Pineda, who is the coordinator of the working group on irregular mass
También
migration
él es director de investigación para políticas
and
públicas del Centro de
Director of
Estudios
Research
Migratorios
for
de la
Public
Universidad
Policies
Santo
of
Domingo
the
y
Migration Study
secretario de
Centers,
Seguridad de Personas de la
Migration
Secretaría de
Policy
Gobernación.
and Registration of the Secretary of the Interior. Gustavo, you have the floor.
Luis Alonso, ¿qué tal? Muchas gracias. Marco, muchas
Thank you.
gracias. Rosy, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a la OIM, por supuesto, por
Yeah.
su disposición.
Thank you
a
to the
participar en
IUM
esta tercera
for their
sesión
willingness
de
to
los
participate
talleres
in
de
this
formación
third
en políticas
session
públicas intergubernamentales.
of training sessions on
Marco, en un principio,
public policy.
o los talleres están pensados
The
de forma
workshops
tal
have
que
been conceived
pensamos desde
so
la
as to
perspectiva
have continuity among them. From the PPT, this working group in particular, it was necessary when we are talking about migrant population and mass irregular migration flows, we need to have 3 topics on hand: non-discrimination, the use of force, and assisted return, which were basic topics to be addressed. And we needed experts to be able to hear their experiences and best practices and make us see the challenges we have in this regard. The first workshop was facilitated by ARNCOM, where we saw non-discrimination. I think there was a broad participation. The second one on Wednesday was facilitated by the ICRC, dealing with the use of force with great participation. And in this third workshop, talking about assisted return within the context of crisis, we are going to have officers from the different countries so they can give us their perspective. And one of the lessons learned so far is that we cannot think about migration as something that is standalone. We need a strategy for the region that include these topics today and others. And it's vitally important that all the different tables and have a different strategies that allow us to have a view of the problems faced by migrants and how we can assist them. And that is the spirit of the workshops, to try to have best practices and, most important, to have them implemented and have a regional exchange of information regarding this particular topic. Assisted return is something basic because last year and this year, it has been very complicated to be able to manage borders. And they are vitally important, these assisted returns, as well as non-discrimination, especially in times of crisis. And we have seen an increase in the process of discrimination, especially related to COVID, and they have to be seen together holistically because that's how we can address
Muchas gracias.
the migration phenomenon in the region.
Este taller
Thank
con
you
el
very
que
much, Luis
finalizamos
Alonso.
sea,
The one that we finished with.
y todos quienes estamos
I
aquí,
hope that it's going to be a very fruitful encounter, not only officers, but also migrants within the context of mobility. And to start, I'm going to give the floor to the IOM who's going to be facilitating the workshop. Regional focus or approach for safe and orderly return within the context of crisis. It's going to be moderated by Rosalind and Ana Catalina Picado from the same unit. So I'm leaving everybody in great hands. Rose, you have the floor. And I want to make sure
Ahí está,
that
compartiendo pantalla.
Catalina is with us. She is sharing her screen. Can you test your microphone? Morning. I hope everybody is okay.
Bueno, estamos bien con la tecnología, eso me
Yeah,
alegra.
we are okay with the technology. Today we have a session for you that it's going to be a mix of presentations and activities. And give me 1 second.
¿Me escucha? Ah, ok. Perdón, es que Catalina tiene mi nombre.
And, Catalina has my name and she was muted. So I was commenting that this is going to be an interactive session. It's not going to be just presentation because we need a bit of interaction, you know, a discussion. Everybody can hear me.
Hola, hola.
Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you.
Sí, Rose, la escuchamos bien.
Gracias.
También te escucho, Rose.
Perfecto, perfecto, perdón.
Okay. So we are going to mention that we are going to have a few activities with, and you will be provided links for those.
Entonces, en el día de hoy, como ya
And today, as you were seeing and hearing, we have voluntary assisted returns. And maybe those who have not worked so much with the topic, we are going to go through certain definitions and concept frameworks regarding best practices. And of course, including reintegration also, to talk about the challenges within the context of pandemic, caravan,
para aplicar este marco conceptual y esta
spaces
para
that are going to have
finalmente esperemos que
the possibility of having a safe and dignified return. So we are going to talk about some tools and guidelines that we can use in future.
Entonces, los temas que vamos a abarcar primero.
Topics we're going to have. We have international framework, key definitions, and some lessons learned at the global level, and also some guidelines at the regional level. And finally, we would like to have a conversation. I think you've seen the questions that were shared yesterday to know a bit more about the experience, how you adapted to the situation, and whether we can have some recommendations for the future.
Adelante, por favor. Entonces vamos a comenzar con una
So we are going to have a little activity. I'm going to give the floor to Ana Catalina.
Hola, muy buenos días. Un gusto estar con ustedes.
Morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. And the activity we have, it's called Let's Tell a Story Together. This is an activity to tell story within training exercises And it's great to break the ice and to be aware of the topic. It's an exercise to be in the shoes of those about whom we're talking. So I would like to have a volunteer, and the dynamic is the following. I'm going to start talking about the person's history on the left hand side. Lady who's migrated
Mucho de la
or just
interpretación que hagamos de los
migrated
dibujos.
depends on your interpretation. And I am going to start the story, but then you will continue it. It's very interesting exercise. So I really invite you to do it. It is a way of walking a mile in the shoes of somebody else. So try to experience what they are experiencing. Maria is a migrant. She lived in Colombia with her family. She had a daughter, a cat. She lived in the country, but she had to leave for Argentina. She is continuously asking herself whether she should stay in Argentina or go back to Colombia. She really misses her daughter. She sends her mother drawing saying because she dreams
Entonces,
about her
en este
mother's
momento
return.
cedo la palabra a otra persona que quiera continuar.
So, anybody else would like to continue with the story? Who would like to take on the story? She went with her mother, own mother. Both of them are in Argentina. She is talking to her friends at school that migrants are like her. Anybody else?
En su viaje únicamente llevaba
Maria was only carrying a little backpack with personal stuff. She left behind a world of nature and of quiet and of humanity.
Excelente. ¿Alguien más?
Anybody else?
María desea llegar a otro
Maria
país
wants
donde
to go to another country
mejores oportunidades,
where she can have better opportunities
pueda ser feliz y
and can be
otras
happy and have
cosas que en su país no puede tener.
have things that she cannot have in her own country.
Muy bien. ¿Alguien más quiere participar?
Anybody else? To close the activity. Anybody else who wants to finish the story?
¿Alguna se anima a hacer la conclusión de la historia?
Anybody else would like to finish the story? Maria does not know what the future entails, but she is trying to find a better story ending for her and her family.
Con eso cerramos
Thank
la
you
actividad.
so much.
Continuamos con la presentación.
This is the activity, and thank you for your participation. Thank you for helping us, starting by thinking about and as somebody with whom we're working or for whom we're working.
Viendo un poco el
So we're
marco
going to
teórico
start
y repasando algunas
with the
definiciones.
theoretical framework and some lessons learned. The first thing we want to highlight that everybody has the right to migrate, to move. Every person has the right to leave any country, including their own, and to return to that country. Article 13 of the Universal Declaration. And as was explained at the beginning of this session, that returning all its dimensions is part of migration management. And not only to provide assistance to those people in their country that are returning, or those from other nationalities that want to return to their own countries. as well as, of course, their own fellow citizens that want to
La
return
migración
from
de
other
retorno
countries.
como un derecho e
So
incluirlo.
migration governance must consider return migration as a fundamental human right and include that in their policies.
Sabemos también, y
We
esto
also know, and has been well described by some authorities in the beginning of today's session, that we are facing in this region, we are facing flows in all places, and from all places we have a mixture of countries of origin, transit, destination, flows with many different characteristics and profiles. We have people from the region and even from other parts of the world, extra-regional, extra-continental migrations, which are becoming increasingly frequent. And when we define migration for return or return migration, we think holistically at the IOM. We're thinking about the movement of people who return to their country of origin or of usual
asistimos
residence.
retornar voluntariamente
Because we have a voluntary return to a country where they reside, they have legal residence there, and this return can be voluntary or forced. It can be assisted or independently organized by the migrant. So when we're talking about return, it is a very broad definition. It is a continuum. For example, a person may have the control and the resources to return on their own, or they require humanitarian assistance, or they are being forced to return because of their migration status.
Vamos a ver si hacemos una
Let's start with an interactive game. So, Catalina, you have the floor. Thank you, Rose. And there's another game. It is a word cloud, and it's going to be organized by the application to know a bit more about your first reactions to the question we are reading next. So please go in your different browser, go to menti.com, and then when you click enter, and then you will go with Mentimeter here. There, it's going to ask you for a code, and you can see there, 3628 7937. So please go to menti.com and enter the code so we know the activity. The code, you will also be able to see it.
Acá en la parte superior pueden ver el código. Listo, por ahí lo pueden ver también. El 36287937.
There you see the code, and it's also in the chat if you want to just copy paste.
Entonces, una vez que ustedes empiecen a
Now, once you enter the words, the application itself will be then fashioning this word cloud.
Vamos a dar unos minutitos para que logren
And we are going to give you a couple of minutes so you can go to Menti and enter the code.
Excelente, ya empiezo a ver algunas palabras.
Excellent. I start seeing some words. Why are migrants returning to their country of origin?
Reunificación familiar.
Family
Devolución.
reunification, they returned. No other options.
Se va moviendo un poco. Vamos
Okay.
las palabras que van ingresando.
You see the different words that they failed. Unemployment, lack of documentation to put up a business, personal problems to be with their family. They were detained by the authorities, health issues, there is no work. They were returned. Their roots, culture, family. And we have a new words here. The deportation, reunification, and yeah, I think business, lack of documentation or goals in their countries, health, militarization,
Nostalgia.
or they're also nostalgic about their country. Nostalgia is another. And as you can see, the most repeated words are bigger. So family reunification is much bigger than others because many people are entering that particular word or words. So family reunification, also when they're being returned forcibly, unemployment, deportation, and family employment.
Excelente. Muchísimas gracias a todos y todas por su participación. Vamos
Thank you very much for your participation. This is giving us a framework
aproximaciones al tema del retorno en la
exploring
presentación y
our approximations to understand a bit more
cuál es nuestra experiencia con el tema del
and
retorno.
also to know what our experience is with return and how we can help return migrants. Rose, again, you have the floor. Thank you to all the colleagues who participated. We have similar concepts with different words. Where we have family reunification, or work and unemployment can be related. So let's go with the next one. And we can see that we have a diversity of people who return, but also the different ways in which they return. We also want to indicate that people are motivated by different factors. Many times there can be a change in their personal circumstances or that of their family, where they are or in their country of origin. So right now, we are seeing a lot of people who have lost their jobs. Their situation has changed, so they may need to return home. Some people may have a certain migration status that is expiring. And that's something we also see frequently. And also changes in public policy, new opportunities or new barriers, and that can change in the region in terms of opportunities on migration rules that can also change the scenario for the person. Socio-political, socioeconomic changes in the country. For example, there is an economic downturn or it's a new opportunity in the country of origin, because in Guyana we are seeing new opportunities because of oil. So if this becomes a better option, would be part of the motivation to return. And there's a complexity in the profiles of returning migrants for different reasons. So we would like to have another activity. I'm going to have Catalina guide us in this regard. And once again, hi. We are going to use another tool we have. It's called Annotate that has Zoom. In the bar that you have different ways, mute or stop video and
Algunas personas lo
participants.
van a encontrar, como pueden ver,
Some people will see it and find it in the view options, and then you have the option to annotate, and you will see it in the integrated bar, and depends on the there you will see annotate, and within the annotate toolbar you're going to see mouse, select, text, draw. We are going to stamp, so you're going to see these figures, checks, X's, a heart. So we are going to play with that. And there's a rooster there that's quite excited. So let's see where we are going to use our seals. So you can see
Estampe o selle la opción
question.
que considere correcta.
Please stamp the correct option or the one that you think is correct. The 2030 agenda contemplates among its commitments to facilitate safe and dignified return. True or false? Mauricio started.
Excelente. Muy bien.
So
Mi gallo está muy contento esta mañana.
yeah,
Saludando.
yeah, you see my rooster's really excited.
Mónica también. Rita.
Monica,
¿Listo?
Rita,
Excelente. Y sí, efectivamente.
yes, effectively, as it has been unanimously said, the agenda does include return, safe and dignified among its commitments. Thank you. Thank you for reaffirming and including the rooster that the 2030 agenda does include the importance of a safe and dignified return. And let's see the international commitments we have. Of course, we have return. For example, if you have a certain profile, and many times we are focusing on migration and regular, orderly, and safe migration or movement. And that's something we want to highlight, very important. We have to think about the whole migration process. And also regarding the compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, thematic area 3, regarding migration, but objective 21 specifically talks about facilitating return and readmission in conditions of safety and dignity.
Y la reintegración sostenible
And
es una parte muy importante.
sustainable reintegration is very important. Continue, please. Here I have the text because it has many of the topics we want to underscore today regarding assisted return and how it is done. It is not just that the person will come back. There's a lot of learning on how to support, especially voluntary returns, for them conditions of safety, security, dignity with the different states and stakeholders that are participating, for example, those providing assistance during the return process. There are issues regarding safety, no undue, for example, we have assistant return, for example, not this type of return that's called a refoulement because the person really needed, for example, refugee status. So all of those have to be taken into account. So basically, based on the global conceptual framework, I want to bring to you IOM's global framework based on our experience.
Entonces, aquí vamos a ver si podemos
So
compartir con ustedes
here
un
we're
breve
going to
video
see if we can
todos los
share
programas
with
de
you a
apoyo al
brief
beneficiario, cómo son
video
muchos de
that
los
talks
beneficiarios
about
existen, por
voluntary
ejemplo,
returns.
beneficiarios
And
por
Catalina,
en la presentación.
let's see if we can do this within the presentation. Please let me see if you can hear the video.
Lo veo.
Okay, we see the video. Yeah. Today, 1 out of 7 is a migrant. People migrate for different reasons. One, for better opportunities. Others are fleeing violence, conflicts, or natural disasters. Anyway, you see that some need to return because they want to go back to their families, because the conditions have changed in the different countries, or because they do not have legal status or job opportunities. Making that decision may be difficult and usually means going back to a new work, new lifestyle, again with your family and making plans for the future. Since 1979, IOM, the International Organization for Migration, has helped over 1.5 million people to return to the countries of origin through their voluntary assisted return and reintegration program, AVRR. And the number of people benefiting has increased due to the growing migration flows around the world. This program is part of migration governance because it deals with the aspirations of migration as the concerns of the government. So how do we translate it into practice? AVRR provide financial and logistic support and administrative support to migrants who do not have the means to return home. This includes personal or tailored approach, and it's complemented with reintegration assistance to assist beneficiaries to rebuild their lives in the communities where they return. In those with vulnerable situations, they are given customized assistance that may include looking for the families of unaccompanied minors, evaluation of risk for victims of trafficking, and healthcare needs during the trip back home. Voluntary is key. It is for sustainability of reintegration, and migrants must understand how the program works so they can make an informed decision. IOM assessors will accompany them, and the beneficiaries may change their mind at any time until or right before they leave. IOM can do the necessary formalities for the trips and even help them to embark on the given day. Voluntary returns are usually using commercial flights or buses, like any other traveler, and migrants can have assistance while in transit. If necessary, we can have even a medical escort. And reintegration, it is essential to assure their well-being once they come back to their communities of origin. There's not a single model. Reintegration assistance depends on, among others, on their needs, the specific programs, and available resources. Returnees can have support to enter into productive activities or to reestablish family or friendship bonds. Follow-up with migrant is a substantial part of evaluating the success or the challenges for the reintegration and to adjust interventions. Right now, we have a broad network of IOM offices with AVRR programs in over 170 countries and territories with committed personnel. To extend the positive impact of this program, IOM facilitates dialogue with several stakeholders around the world, including governments, international organizations, migrant organizations, NGOs, and the private sector, safeguarding the dignity of the rights of migrants, trying to get sustainable and durable solutions for all. Thank you, Catalina, for this video showing how we are working. I am sharing it because that is a new game.
No, ok, perfecto.
Perdón.
Okay, perfect.
No sé si quieren preguntas.
Marco.
Como gusta, no hay problema.
Okay. Marco.
Muchas gracias, Luis. Y bueno, excelente la presentación.
And excellent video and presentation. I just want to reiterate
por parte del gobierno de México para continuar
this position by the Mexican government to continue working in this program of voluntary assisted and reintegration. And I think that we can develop the potential of this voluntary return and reintegration program, including making it more cost efficient. For example, if we have the availability of funds to facilitate air bridges with certain countries, for example, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras mainly, maybe with greater collaboration, we could expand its impact and benefit a greater number of people who could benefit from this model. For example, we have a flight and we only have 60 people in that flight. We could have a greater collaboration and be able to have more people use that particular flight and leverage the empty space. Here in our Mexico office, as we have expressed it before, and our colleague who is managing the program here, and especially when we're talking about the resources that we have here in the Mexican government regarding different logistics aspects, including shelters, so we can have greater benefits or reach for this program. Thank you for mentioning that. When we go to the next part, how critical it is to have the cooperation of all involved parties. Assisted return is something that is at an individual level, case by case. It is different than an evacuation, but sometimes the number of people we are assisting that are large enough so for us to be able to charter a flight. And each time that we have done this, we have to fulfill all the different rules, especially when we're talking about identification of people who can benefit. This was just to show you how we are supporting many in assisted return. And when we have a closed airport, we were still able to support over 42,000 people who were returning home last year, which is impressive in its own right, and shows the willingness and of the governments involved, because it was necessary to have a special flights or buses that would fulfill all the requirements, and we're going to see that in greater detail. And these programs can be very diverse. The videos showed something holistic. We're talking about support, but we have programs that are specifically designed for
Hay
people who are
programas que
being
solo
returned by
enfocan
the
en la
government,
reintegración, por ejemplo.
others that only focus in reintegration, and others that have specific profile and are dedicated for unaccompanied minors or victims of violence or trafficking. Next.
La próxima, por favor, Cata.
In terms,
sorry,
in terms of the profiles of migrants, we are talking about the story of the people and who have or want to return to the countries of origin and don't have the means. Those are the ones who go to the consulates that want to have programs with assisted voluntary return. And they are very
Les
different
recuerdo que
profiles.
tenemos un fondo
And remember, we have an assistance fund for vulnerable migrants. In future events, we are going to give you the data on that. And what we are seeing is an increase of numbers in situation of vulnerability because they are no longer able to survive where they are, because they have lost all their options and they depend on social aid or friends, and or they might even be evicted. The pandemic is really impacting migrants in the region and global. And we also have migrants that may have suffered, for example, victims of a crime, for example, human trafficking, unaccompanied minors.
Autoridades de protección a la niñez se
And we have also that some countries may say that the best option, for example, for a minor, and they would require support for that. Also, profiles who are seeking asylum and they were not successful, or because they have decided to stop that process. We are collaborating with others in ACNUR or UNHCR to evaluate the risk of return or not. For us, it is essential to remember we talking about people who want to return, which makes assisted voluntary return programs different from other types of return, taking into account informed decisions of the person, the voluntary aspect that they have, the information so they can look for asylum, and especially before they make their decision to return. They also need to clearly understand the offer of this assisted return of only the preparation of the trip, or if it's going to incorporate support, for example, integration. And we are focused on the rights and very specific needs of different people and would prevent forced returns. People that are in a regular situation say that assisted return is better than staying in regular status and eventually being deported. So when we're talking about people that have few options left and they would like to return in a more voluntary fashion. and our programs, especially regarding financial logistics support and hopefully for their reintegration. It's usually quite challenging. I'm not going to talk about the different stages. That's not that we are buying the plane tickets. We're not a travel agency. And it's talking about a model applied within the countries. And we're going to talk about the best practices. We're going to see the different stages. We have activities to determine if it's sufficiently safe, and sometimes we can send people to local orientation or referrals or even humanitarian assistance. And as we saw in the video, we have support in transit and in different land ports, and depends on the specific programs. This will mean not only reception and transportation to the final community, but derivation to existing services. And we are going to stop here, and we are going to give the floor to Ana Catalina.
Hola nuevamente. En este espacio de reflexión.
Hi again. In this space of reflection, we would like to emphasize the following. We would like to know why we would have to safeguard the rights of migrants, what rights they have as returnees, the legal framework, and if the country of origin should receive their nationals that are being returned to have a basis with which to work with the next part of the presentation. So I'm going to give you the floor again. Anybody wanted to take the floor?
Tenemos una mano de Glenda.
We have, I think, Glenda who would like to take the floor. Morning all. I would like to talk about the rights that you would have in the country for their nationals, for the ones that are given for by the Constitution, healthcare, education, livelihood, voting. They are again the same people who left. And sometimes when they left, there was no reason to be in the country. They're looking for jobs. They want to achieve their own goals. So these rights have to be given. They are frustrated, for example, from their trips. So these people must be part of an approach because they have this psychological trauma. How do we incorporate them again? And we have to service them in the best fashion possible. It is welcome back when you go back to home where you've had a very good experiences. That's what we need to do as countries, to have for our compatriots. Thank you, Glenda. Great contribution. And effectively, migrants have all the rights others have. Everybody is human beings. And when you are returning, you also have your psychological emotional baggage. For example, you were not able to achieve your dream. You may be frustrated and you think that you were not able to solve your previous problem. For example, difficult economic conditions or debts. Glenda is really
personas
telling
se
us
realicen como
something
seres
very
humanos y
useful.
puedan
We
tener
need livelihood, especially within return and reintegration, especially. Anybody else would like to participate?
Perdón, es que yo no puedo ver las manitas.
I can't see the
No hay manitos en este momento.
no,
Ya
right
si
now we
usted
don't
sabe,
have
no
any.
quiere tomar micrófono, si no
Any-
encuentra manito, no hay problema.
If anybody wants to take the floor, please do so.
Sí, por favor, Mónica.
Adelante,
Please,
Mónica.
Monica. Yes, as Glenda was saying, all the rights, but specifically given the conditions of return, we have to ensure right to healthcare, non-discrimination, information, another situation, family reunification, and reintegration into society with proper conditions, all dignified conditions, and they have the same rights, as you said before leaving the country. And they have special conditions for return, and that would be some of the things that have to be guaranteed by the different countries. As individuals, we have rights, but the countries have to enforce them, guarantee them, specific guarantees with specific return policies and the reintegration of their fellow citizens.
Muchísimas gracias, Mónica. Y sí, efectivamente, la reintegración es
Yes,
un paso sustancial.
reintegration is substantial
Y es justamente uno de los temas que vamos a estar abordando
and one of the topics that we are going to be touching in the next presentations. Now we give the floor to Rose, so we continue
Muchas
with the
gracias,
presentation.
Catalina y colegas.
Thank
No
you,
es-
Catalina. Colleagues, I did not hear the topic about non-refoulement, or you would say no devolution. And especially when we're talking about the specific profile of the person. People who can be afraid and may need special protection, like international protection, or if they are minors. We have protection to minor, the best interest of the child, for example, or how we can work specifically with victims of trafficking. All of these are connected when we're talking about migrants. And we're talking about a human rights approach. And we can have a focus of rights in general. So we have legal frameworks that have to be taken that into account as
Entonces,
well.
resumiendo un poco,
To summarize a bit, this focus, regardless of their nationality and other approaches, we have the right to return, asylum, no return, respect of family private life, and medical social assistance with integration and reintegration we're talking about, and of course the rights of children and adolescents and the best interest of the child, and what was given as part of this approach. And when we're talking about profiles, very important to take into account as well.
Entonces, hay un modelo que no vamos a...
So there is a model that we're not going to dwell too much in detail here. We are using to determine what migrant could be a victim or vulnerable. We're talking about vulnerability determining factors and also with the family, community, structural, contextual situations such as pandemic or a caravan, and that can provide risk factors or protection factors depending on the situation. So we would have the model explained with a few examples. First, we are going to have a brief reflection. Catalina?
Muchas gracias, Rose.
Thank you, Rose.
Bueno, en este pequeño espacio quisiéramos
In
traer a la
this
mesa otra discusión,
step,
otra
we would
aproximación.
like to have another approximation and discussion to these ideas. When we're talking about a migrant in a situation of vulnerability, who could that person be? What types of situation would be making them vulnerable? So we would like to have some input and what type of violence, exploitation, abuse, or rights violation they could be facing. So we are going to open the stage for you to answer these questions. I still see no hands.
Bueno, para interactuar, ¿verdad?
To interact, and the great thing is for us to participate,
penoso, y yo comprendo
but
eso.
sometimes you are shy. And I can see what migrants in a situation of vulnerability might be, for example, would be that they left or recruitment by gangs because of generalized violence in the country, and that individual requested asylum or refuge. Okay, and if that person was returned, it would be even more delicate because their life is in danger, and that is a migrant situation of vulnerability, and which brings them to this vulnerable situation. And we have healthcare issues. For example, they have healthcare issues and they are returned. There is something that can happen and which we don't want. What type of violence, exploitation, or abuse they might be facing. We could have then trafficking. If we had that person who was returned but was a victim of trafficking, is a person that we have to take care of regarding their return. We have another hand. It is a pleasure being here, and thank you for this great activity. Very interesting. Regarding situations of vulnerability, we could talk about a family that they sold everything in their country of origin to go with this very dangerous and expensive trips to go to the US, and sometimes they may have to go through the whole continent to be able to reach the country. And then they are deported. And when they return to the country of origin, they have to start from scratch. So they are in a very serious situation of vulnerability. Maybe they could have some illness or disease, or a member of their family was sexually abused or assaulted even. So we have many factors that these people may be suffering. And if you're victims of trafficking or unaccompanied minors or people who are being separated, or if the mother was separated and the minor is in the country of destination and she was deported, she will try to make it back and try for the minor to be back in the country of origin. And these decisions might be different, I mean,
Muchísimas
and
gracias.
can place them at even bigger risk.
Karen.
Karen, adelante, Karen.
Karen,
Hola, buenos días a todos y todas. Gracias, ¿verdad?
morning all for this support. And regarding migrants in situation of vulnerability, from having the initiative of doing the trip, they're effectively vulnerable because of everything that has been
Lo que es el delito de la
commented.
trata y sus diversas modalidades. Tanto
For example, with sexual exploitation or trafficking, of course, all labor. And in this position of vulnerability, and many times these people who are leaving our countries, although they know the situation that may have in their own country, because remember, the identification of whether they have rights or not is the way that we are working in. So people may think they have no rights and they have no vulnerability. So they will not have any, for example, claims, files any claims, or the conditions, or whether their life is in danger, or whether they have the access to a condition of refugee. So it is very important,
donde podamos nosotros ser
and
este
the
ente
spaces that we can provide and for which we can be an interlocutor for people who are migrating and organized crime that we see in migration route. For example, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, we have the situation of people who have disappeared along the migration route, and these people are in a vulnerable situation. And the permanent, you see, grieving of the family because they don't know how they're doing. And many people leave not because they want to. The country forces them out because we have forced recruitment by gangs or climate change or any other driving forces. COVID right now, because we have seen a lot of businesses closing. So people live where if it was difficult to have a job before, now it's even more difficult. And the type of violence that we see along the migration route and the different processes that we see, and the National Forum for Migration Honduras, which are the regional focal point, and we see here that most rights violations are perpetrated by authorities. So these places them even more in a more vulnerable situation. And we are basically training authorities, not only in transit but in origin. And when you have migrants, instead of helping them, they would have a situation of fear or greater vulnerability.
¿Alguna otra persona que quiera participar para cerrar la actividad?
Anybody else would like to participate? I see no more hands. Let's recap everything that we have been sharing in this reflection. We have particular issues, structural violence. We have forced recruitment and the activities that they do, even to extort small businesses and their families. And this can force people to migrate, and the risk of human trafficking. And when we have, for example, a need, traffickers and smugglers can start doing some misleading advertising, if you wish. And we can have other types of recruitment, publishing, saying that there's great opportunity somewhere else. Hey, this could work for me. And they have deceit and threats, which contributes to migrants and people in general to be forced to migrate. And that people don't have information about their right and think that an irregular migration status means they cannot approach the authorities because they weren't going to be deported. So they don't look for help. And not only because of the fear of authorities, because they feel they are not protected because they accepted a proposal. And we're also talking about livelihood, very important, because economic migration is one of the factors for which people migrate. We are also talking about unaccompanied or separated minors and separation of families, which is a very difficult process that we have recognized through the media and situations like health, not only as a product of COVID that has generated this crisis, but also because before COVID, a lot of people were migrating and looking for opportunities or access to proper health care. So having all the information that we got from your interventions, I would like to give the floor back to Rose. Thank you for this activity. Excellent mapping, showing us different vulnerability profiles. Some of them linked to root cause that can push for regular and dangerous migration. Others with experiences along the route of irregular migration, let's say with traffickers or smugglers, and others with profiles like unaccompanied or separate minors. That's why are we talking about this when we're talking about return? That's the complexity of organizing assisted return or voluntary return. Because behind this, people who needed to return, we have these profiles, these experiences, and we are also having the issue of what will happen after their return, whether they will need it to migrate again. And regarding the global framework that the IOM has and which I'm showing presently, we have this need to detect and respond to specific needs before, during, and after the movement. It's not just to organize transportation. So let's try to see briefly this model of determinant factors for vulnerability. People have factors, risk factors, vulnerability factors. Let's see this person in a transit. For example, 28 years would be factor of protection, and his age and gender could help him and even protect him. But if we know that has this person is coming from a history of violence, that could be a risk factor that can have a big impact on the organization of their return.
Además, que vive en un barrio
And also, and that they live in a place where they have less access to different services. And if we have a legislative gap with, we could also have a risk factor for this person. A person of 28 years of age could see that would have not a lot of vulnerability, but we can see that there can be vulnerability factors. Let's see a woman in the destination, and it would be a risk factor because of gender-based violence and discrimination and equality that can happen within this context. And she comes from a family with a certain level of education, which can be a protection factor. More access to resources, support. And we also know that she lives in a privileged neighborhood. That's also a protection factor. So we are talking that we have more protection factors than risk factors, really. And maybe we see her as a vulnerable migrant woman, but risk factors, although they exist, are fewer than protection factors. Last example of a minor whose country of origin, risk factor being a child or teenager. The father has certain employability. They have technological skills, for example. They live in a place where high level of employment. So we can see that we have positive and negative factors. So the model asks us to identify factors of risk and protection that have to deal with the person, context, community, and structural and contextual situation. Let's see pandemic. So we can have a response. Voluntary assisted return is a tool for this response. Let's continue. So we would like to finish with a model to determine vulnerability. Not all migrants are vulnerable, and in categories are not so easy just because of age or gender. And to see what type of protection or assistance can be needed, we need to talk and think about the different dimensions and factors so we can have actions that respond to the risks and that can promote resilience and promotion of protection factors if possible. And that's something that you do all the time, talking about assistance, protection, and return, the decision, for example, of which actions to be taken. And here, for your use, we have a tool that we saw a couple of years ago, a global framework that captures best practices of our experience for 40 years in assisted return. It's based on practical experience, has several elements that we are going to explain in the next few slides. So please, you have the next one. So the framework indicates that migrants need assistance to return voluntarily in a safe manner, as well as to be able to be reintegrated in full respect of their human rights. And we are going to talk about sustainable reintegration, not only return. And this is tied to the issue that is a right to migrate. And we need new options so they don't feel that migration is their only way for them to make it. So we have 7 principles, a lot of information for each, but we are going to highlight the ones that we have. The principles, in addition of protecting confidentiality in data management or working with partnerships with all
organizaciones como la OIM,
different partners, worked with evidence. We have a particular focus in the voluntary aspect and safety and sustainability of the process and how it can work for people. And when we were showing the video and we were talking about the woman in the first exercise and talking about the different vulnerabilities that were identified, a critical part of this support is that people are going to have an informed decision. And this can be a challenge. Many times we have a very critical information situation. For example, they are going to be losing, for example, the ability to have different options and to be able to become regularize the situation or to return, and for them to help them make the decision. And when we have international protection elements, the decision to seek asylum or not, or when we have a criminal element and that shapes the decision, or for example, how about if you have to testify or not, when you have to have an impact, we have then to have a critical orientation for the actions of the people. And people may not have the option. Maybe they don't qualify for asylum or regularization because they're not victims of trafficking. So their options are to stay irregularly, maybe be deported, or go with assistance. But even that is informed decision. We also have migrants that have been in the country of destination, the host country. They have no roots with their country of origin, really. They don't have any ties to their country of origin. Sometimes they don't know what's going on there, if there is a program or not, and if whether they are going to participate in the program. And the only thing, the other thing that I want to highlight is safety, especially in situations of crisis. In, let's say, natural disaster, we have a caravan and they are stranded because of different situations. For example, the pandemic that left many people stranded. And you have to go through protocols to protect rights, and we do a risk evaluation that is periodically executed. And we have, for example, have tried or have had to suspend support because of local context. And people say they want to return, and then we evaluate and determine that we cannot do that because it wouldn't be sufficiently safe.
a otras organizaciones,
and
de ONGs, de ACNUR, de gobierno, etcétera.
we have other
Entonces, seguridad también no
NGOs
hacer
or
más
other
daño,
organizations with which
asegurar que
we
no
can
estamos
help.
solucionando una persona
And
contra el principio de la non-refoulement.
we have, of course, to take into account the principle of non-refoulement and the best interest of the child. And of course, you know that much better than I. And I also want to talk about sustainable return. And now sustainable reintegration. And today we have a lot of countries that indicate the right of return, but sometimes we do have those negative causes that push people to migrate, and that does not disappear after the return. And we've heard it before. It can be even worse. They have gone abroad, they had a negative experience, or were the victims of violence, and they returned in worse condition, and they left because it was their best opportunity at the time. So what we have as a global learning is that if you need to have sustainable reintegration, they have to have work, economic self-sufficiency, and they need to have or retake roots, to have a social stability, and work on impact on return and migration, and they have psychosocial well-being. These are the three aspects that we work on, and we also measure it as successful and sustainable when people can make again a decision to migrate, but as an option. And that's the critical part that I want to share with you. And I don't think that there's you always need to have always support or support packages to be able to have this type of sustainability. We want to work with safe and suitable return, and sometimes that they want to migrate again irregularly because they feel it is their only option. And we need to keep working on that particular space of the root factors that push for migration in the first place. I'm not going to go into more detail, but we have a book on sustainable integration that we are going to see in for the region in Spanish, and talks about working reintegration in different levels and family and structures. So if you are interested, we are going to be launching this material, and we're going to have an online course in eCampus. And finally, for those who are interested in data, part of this assisted support, it is what we're doing. If the reintegration is actually working, we have indicators to measure the different dimensions, and we hope that more and more we are going to have data saying how we are doing regarding reintegration. So within this framework, we have different objectives which are similar. We continue, Catalina. And right now, to close this part, we're going to give the floor once again to Catalina to continue working with this. Hello again. In this opportunity, we have a case that we want to solve together. We are going to read this together, and we have 3 questions to answer. Maybe somebody would like to help us read the first paragraph.
Yo le ayudo si gusta.
If you want, I can help you.
Donde inicia Juan, ¿verdad?
Donde inicia
Where
Juan.
Juan is
Ok.
starting,
Juan
yes.
migró a Atlantis, ya que había perdido la
Yeah,
cosecha de
Juan
sus
migrated because he lost
producto de la
his crop for 2 years in a row due to drought and had a big bank debt, and he was about to lose his land. And so he had to leave his family and migrate. Shall I continue or somebody else? Yeah, if you want to continue, yeah, sure. He went to Atlantis and found work in a factory. He was having better situation, and situation was improving for the family. But an outbreak in that country affected the economy, and Juan was fired. The borders were closed. Air companies were not operating flights in the country, and there was no way to return for Juan. He had to use his savings while looking for a solution. He asked for help and finally was able to return, but the initial condition
Juan,
that forced
había
him to
muchas
migrate
otras
was
personas en
still
esa situación.
latent. And we had the same situation for many other people in the town.
Gracias. Bueno, ya tenemos un contexto, ¿verdad?
So we have a context, we have a scenario, the case of Juan, very interesting factors, the ones that forced him to migrate, and the situation in which he was living, especially when he was in Atlantis. Everything started well, but then this disease had an effect in a side effect in the economy, and he was not able to return to the country. So right now, this is a bit familiar to what we've seen in the last year. So we wanted to bring this exercise to respond to some of the questions that we may have on the left of the screen. The first question would be, do you think that return and reintegration of Juan were sustainable based on what Rose said before? Do you think that the return and reintegration of Juan were sustainable? Anybody would like to take the floor and tell us what they think about it?
No veo manitos todavía.
Manitas.
No hands yet.
Claudia, por favor.
Claudia.
Claudia?
No es una situación
It is not sustainable at all. He was forced to return, really, the doors closed. We have the same or worse situation. Most likely, he will try to migrate again.
familiar,
And he would
comunitario,
require community support, structural support with a reintegration support program, either through support, economic support, or involvement in productive projects, public policy that would be focused on this generalized poverty issue. And I think that this would be a protection factor, that possibility that he migrates, yeah, because the situation in the country where he was is also complicated. So thank you very much, Claudia. Anybody else would like to take the floor?
¿Hay alguna otra manita levantada?
Anybody else?
Yo voy a comentar.
Karen,
I would like to make a
Sí, bueno,
comment. Yeah,
en torno
sure.
que si se cree que el retorno
Regarding whether this was sustainable, no, but Juan was able to return again.
países de origen no siempre es sostenible.
Reintegration in countries of origin is not always sustainable. Sometimes the help. And what happens when you have a return to the country? Well, we don't have structural policies that can define or actually determine this process for the integration, and whether they can be sustainable over time, and the population that is returning. And sometimes we don't even have 10% access to returning. So whether Juan will want to migrate again, yeah, because his return, because he had to. The situation has not improved. Maybe it was even worse than, and the situation will continue because they still have the debts. He has not been able to pay for everything and is liable to lose the land. And to support, I say what we have said before, reintegration, and if they had children, access to education for the children, which also should be part of the supporting the reintegration, suitable job that allows them to make a living for him and his family, trying to service the debt. And it is a strategic way for him to stay with his family. However, we have to be aware that sometimes this is utopic in nature. Many times we are not going to have immediate answers by our government. And we don't have clear policies regarding return of populations. In mobility, yeah, it's a big challenge. And we hope that we will continue making the best options possible. I think we also have a hand. Yes, I consider, as our colleagues say, it is not sustainable. We have to see that countries in the country should be supporting people who are in complex situations. We need to have an intersector-based that includes governance with international
incluso del gobierno del país de destino y el consulado,
institutions, even consulates,
el
and return
le ayuda quizás a tener una situación
can help in a situation of family stability, because they may have a better care in the country of origin, but it doesn't help with economic or debt. So there is no actual reintegration or improve their situation. So we don't see practical case for sustainable return.
Muchas gracias. Catalina, con su permiso, vamos a seguir entonces.
We will continue.
Fueron opiniones muy acertadas.
Thank you for your opinion.
Ilustrando
And we are
ese tema de
illustrating
retorno y
again
reintegración.
the complexity of return migration. We will continue with best practices and inclusive aspects. And despite the challenges we are identifying and the current situation,
de esos impactos que empujan gente
especially regarding the impacts, And despite all of this, we have a lot of progress in the region. The country has done more in receiving the people being deported, but we have public policy on return and integration, and some countries have dedicated structures. We have programs for voluntary return. So we have intersector programs for returnees, and we have sustainable reintegration. So maybe here the biggest issue would be sustainable reintegration. We can't always offer them more than urgent help, and that is a big challenge for all. There is a support. We have support and agreements, and there's something that we are seeing, trying to see how, when, where we can receive people who are returning from other countries. And we have a very important collaboration, and we have protocols to cooperate in voluntary returns, and especially when we're talking about different specific protocols with the RCM and many countries that may not have these protocols. We have dialogue spaces like these and others that have been facilitated between IOM and other governments. We have best practices, and especially regarding committees, and we have great experiences in best practices. And here we have the Fund for Assistance of Migrants, and these are low numbers. They may not have other solutions, and we are helping vulnerable people, and we have online courses and training courses, and a reintegration course in Spanish and English is already available in the campus, so that's great news. Another example from the region, and the spaces for deported returnees. They have multiple ones, and we have in El Salvador intersector protocols, and different actors from the civil society, spaces for children, adolescents. So I think this is one of the best practices that we can find in the region. And we've seen this a lot in reception of returnees. So now we are going to go to the last half an hour of this session, and let's see our trigger questions. I'm going to give the floor to Ana Catalina.
Gracias, Rose.
Thank you, Rose. In this part, we also want to hear your opinion. I think that this space has been quite valuable. So the question we have right now for everybody is the following. What challenges we have in the identification of vulnerable profiles and how we can reference them to support services? Are we able to provide integrated or comprehensive care or assistance based on the needs, and as well follow up to the cases? So I'm not using the video because I have low bandwidth. So that's the question. So identification of vulnerable profiles, any challenges, and if we're able to provide assistance based on needs and provide follow-up. So if anybody would like to take the floor and tell us about any challenges or any success cases that they've had. I mean, challenges, we have a ton. I don't think we're going to be short of challenges.
Vinicio, adelante. Si
Vinicio.
está pidiendo la palabra. Veo su micrófono abierto. No sé si está. Tal vez no. No sé si alguien quiere pedir la palabra.
Anybody would like to take the floor?
No estoy viendo manitos, Catalina.
I'm not seeing any hands.
Bueno, tal vez si lo traemos al contexto.
And maybe in the context of the pandemic or the caravan, possibly, because we know that in addition of natural disasters that we've had recently, and I am aware returns despite pandemic in the region that posed many challenges related to the pandemic itself.
Bueno, si no, vamos a dejarles pensando. Y también, por supuesto, pueden tomar.
We're going to give you some time. Of course, you can take
Pero
the floor in Spanish or in
yo pienso
English.
que podríamos dejarles pensando en esto y seguir un poquito más hasta la próxima
Let's
sesión. Y si alguien quiere
continue with
tomar la
this.
palabra, nos avisa.
But if you want to take the floor, please do so.
Entonces,
Open your mic.
de mi parte, voy a compartir con ustedes algunos de los
And
que enfrentábamos
we
en
need to
cada
have
uno de
some
ustedes
of the
frente a esos dos
challenges we encountered.
frente a la caravana, la
For
OIM
example, vis-a-vis caravans, IOM has different assistance programs for voluntary return, including mobile units when we have the caravans going by, to provide information.
ofrecerles retorno voluntario si hubo interés. Y por
And
supuesto,
of course, if there's interest, we can arrange for the voluntary return. And since we see this mixed flows with such a variable profiles and composition,
la identificación de perfiles
and the identification of vulnerable profiles is critical and quite challenging
otro
with
ejemplo de la
mass
pandemia fueron los
mixed
cierres
flows.
de frontera. Los cierres de
And
frontera
closed borders, yes, were necessary for the pandemic, but we slowed or we stopped movement.
colaborar entre los países para tener permisos
And
para organizar movimientos.
we needed to, for example, to get permits for movements, and we'll see that later on.
Por,
And
tenemos poco tiempo.
we don't have a lot of time.
Una pregunta detonadora, tal vez van a
And then in the next
las colegas hermanas.
trigger question, we may have more comments. Let's continue then.
En los lineamientos que existen en la región. Oh, perdón.
And a guideline. No, we have somebody, Mónica.
No, muchas gracias, Rose. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Tengo la inquietud antes de la
And before the trigger question, one question that I had, this part of assisted return,
que el año
especially when
pasado
the
sabemos que
borders were closed because of COVID, and some countries even closed borders for the returns of their own fellow citizens. Can you tell us about experiences that you've had in this sense, and what they did, how much or how long you had to wait until the borders were reopened? For example, somebody was requesting assisted return. And another question, in this sense, the criteria for eligibility
proporciona el retorno asistido.
and to
Sabemos
provide assisted return.
Voluntaria, que la persona lo
And it
solicite.
should be voluntary. But there are many people that do fulfill the or meet the requirements or fulfill them,
Porque imagino
and
algunas mantienen el deseo de
some
seguir el
people
curso,
may continue with this,
pero quienes sí desean el apoyo de
and they need how can you apply this criteria for eligibility?
Muchísimas gracias por las preguntas. Bueno,
Thank you
comienzo con
for the question. Let's start with eligibility.
depende del programa, porque estos son programas con
And these are internationally financed programs.
el tema de la voluntariedad y la
And
decisión
the voluntary nature of it,
organizamos.
these are how we are organizing it. But eligibility depends on how the program is built. We have funds for trafficking victims.
Bajo del protocolo de Palermo
So
y usamos
we have to use the Palermo Protocol and certain mechanisms to apply the criteria.
que muchos enfoquen en
And
pero depende del programa como lo
but
define.
we have
Básicamente,
an issue
menores
of
no
vulnerability
acompañados,
as defined by the program, like unaccompanied minors, severe health issues, and stranded migrants, irregular migrants.
de personas, pero algunos
And we have other vulnerabilities, and in addition to just being in a regular status.
Mencioné también
And
personas que han buscado asilo y no fueron
some people have requested asylum and without success,
no calificaron para protección internacional.
and especially people who were not qualifying for international protection. So it really depends on the program.
Precisamente hay categorías.
In the RCM program, we have categories. The elderly,
menores
accompanied minors,
y personas con
victims
problemas
of
médicas y también de
crimes, and people with medical issues.
caso
And we have other vulnerabilities.
la pandemia.
And also, in pandemic, we have people in vulnerable situations that are not longer able to feed themselves. In other words, they don't have any livelihood left.
Voluntariedad y los demás.
And so we have to take into account voluntary nature as well. And remember, it's always collaboration. And for example, when we have complex issues like closed borders.
Desde OIM México, porque
And for example, IOM Mexico, if I'm not mistaken,
de migrantes varados
one of the first moments that we were able to get were from Mexico.
entre los dos países,
And we are coordinating between the two countries the conditions and requirements.
del aeropuerto o del frontera y por
For
otro
example, going in, through the border, whether they needed COVID tests or vaccines. So requirements can change, they're rather fluid. So when we have a movement of both, what's the requisite vaccine or the test? So what we were able to do was to open a specific flight for these people, to bring us some migrants. But normally, normal times, we use commercial flights. So it depends whether they're big groups or not. Or charter flights, they are costly, but they're actually feasible.
vamos a seguir, Catalina, con la presentación.
And let's continue with the presentation.
comernos calabazas a las 11:30.
because
Los lineamientos de la
we only
CRM
have
que
10
tenemos
minutes left.
en retorno a
The
integración incluyen
guidelines for return integration include first for 2004
que fue
that
similar
if you see content, you see concept of determining vulnerabilities and organizing movements. And then we had some guidelines for very specific profiles. Some, for example, children and adolescents who are victims of trafficking under repatriations, and then unaccompanied minors that are within a process of return.
También quiero
And
que hemos hecho más recién
and what we're seeing, this, it's not only other aspects that are relevant or not.
detección de perfiles de vulnerabilidades.
And the vulnerability profiles that is being updated today, it is quite relevant.
Y
To
también
detect vulnerability profiles, and we have guidelines for the protection of children, migrating women, how to protect the best interest of the child. Everything is relevant to return processes.
Próxima, por favor.
So next, please. I also mentioned that we have a global manual on reintegration and an online course in English and Spanish,
específico
and
sobre
specific module.
niños, niñas
And
y
when you have
también tenemos un manual global sobre
in, for example, returning migrants who are children and adolescents, we also have a integration manual and an online course.
Entonces, ahora entrando un
So,
poco más en lo que
going
estábamos
a bit more into what we were previously
sobre lo que pasó en la pandemia.
saying, we want to share a bit what happened during the pandemic.
Creo que en lugar de tener una discusión,
And
si alguien quiere tomar la palabra,
if you want to take the floor, but faced with these situations of crisis, how can we maintain our standards for safe and proper return and sustainable reintegration, especially when faced situations of crisis?
no estamos haciendo
And
daño,
also making sure that we have no risk of return, and of course with the preparation. That is the big challenge. And I want to share a video with you on and before the video, I was looking about the impact of the pandemic on migration.
Un análisis que salió en inglés.
So we had an analysis in English. It's called an analytical snapshot.
Y lo trasladamos al español.
So we translated that. So the new numbers of the UN show 281 million migrants, international migrants, still growing despite the pandemic. But what was determined is that the number of international migrants grew by 27 by grew 27% less compared to the previous year. In other words, 2 million fewer migrants of what would have been expected given the growth trend. So you see in blue growth of international migration per region, and below you see something in red, the number of people, fewer people due to the pandemic. So we see growth. The growth itself was severely impacted by the region. In other words, decreased by about a third.
Nosotros de la OIM, como trabajamos,
IOM, since we are working in July last year, we had detected 3 million stranded migrants who were asking for return. So the headquarters office established a working group on return to negotiate and organize movements of people when everything is closed and how to fulfill the needs of these people. So we formed a working group to be able to deal with it from our country offices.
Creo que ya
Next.
viene el video, si no estoy mal.
I think that, and finally,
Lo que estaba comentando.
and what a summary of what we did,
Sí lográbamos
we
trasladar al
were able to have migrants with the coordination with the different countries, the ones that were leaving Mexico in planes. We were really proud of this.
Las adaptaciones que tuvimos que
And the adaptations that we have,
asesoramiento virtual
this included virtual
entrevistas virtuales.
assessment, virtually speaking. We needed this official permission to do this by video call. We also approved methodologies to obtain virtual consent that would be institutionally accepted, because some forms of chat were allowed, others not, so we were able to record consent in video. And humanitarian assistance was not tied to assisted or voluntary return. So in addition to the return, we started giving hygiene or protection kits, informing about the procedures to be complied with in the country of departure and the country of transit and that of origin. And in some cases, first was quarantine because we did not have tests available. Then it was changed to testing, which was also tied to requirements by airlines and not only the country. So it was really complex. Mobile
para
equipment
desplazarse y llegar
that, for example, trying to reach the caravans and populations that needed help, and also constant relation for local help. We, especially when we have contact with this population, so it was a combination of humanitarian assistance and these options.
Ahora sí, voy a dejar que Catalina nos pone el video.
Now we're going to have the video. Assisted voluntary return from Mexico to El Salvador. The program, it is an initiative of the IOM to allow voluntary return of migrants to their country of origin. IOM takes the necessary precautions to prevent COVID-19. We are going to International Airport to return 42 migrants from El Salvador. They voluntarily agreed to return home, and IOM is making sure that their life is not at risk. So we have made sure that there's no COVID symptoms. We're still working for the well-being of migrants, despite the closed borders. Thank you to IOM and Consulate of Salvador here in Tapachula, Mexico, allowing us to return to our country. Returning is a right of migrants, is to facilitate dignified or proper, voluntary, and safe of migrants. Everybody has the right to leave a country and then to return.
Muchas gracias, Catalina.
Thank you very much. I think there was a comment in the chat that I think it's Vinicio.
Solo mencionar que durante la pandemia hubo buenas prácticas de respuestas
that in the
multisectoriales.
pandemic we had good practices
porque
and we
funcionaron
need to analyze the experience and try to
Muchísimas gracias, Vinicio.
make them
No sé
applicable.
si alguien más le gustaría decir algo,
Anybody else would like,
poner algo en el chat, pero estamos llegando a
but
la última
we
parte de la
are
presentación.
getting to the last part of the presentation.
Globalmente,
So what we were
lesiones
globally
de nuestra experiencia durante pandemia
thinking
de
and
COVID.
our experience,
En el fase antes del retorno,
and before the
la
return,
digitalización y la virtualidad de
the
algunos de estos procedimientos,
virtuality or virtualization and digitalization of the processes,
inclusive la información para que
including
llegue a los potenciales
the
personas que
information
retornar, combinado con
provided to
información
returnees,
relevante y
and this
clave
was
sobre
combined
la
with
prevención de
key
COVID,
pertinent
síntomas,
information on preventing COVID,
etcétera.
symptoms,
Recordamos que
help, etc.
todos nosotros en estos momentos de
And
pandemia
all of us, we were always needing to get prepared and to refer people who showed symptoms, for example, to the proper healthcare authorities.
nuestros beneficiarios seguros también.
So basically keeping ourselves and our beneficiaries and everybody.
Durante el retorno,
During the return, that meant not only a normal physical,
es necesario para viajar,
which is needed to basically be able to travel,
tenían una vinculación con COVID, por supuesto.
and also they were tied to COVID,
Usando
and sometimes we were able to use IOM Global models to hire charters when commercial flights were not available. And when we're talking about quarantine and pandemic, priority was given to volunteer support such as supermarket gift cards or other ways to help people, because that would not require so much interaction, because it was not that easy to interact with beneficiaries to provide immediate support. And so that card was a very good method to provide the support. And then we also did not mention it, but we had a very important experience in Mexico, which was filters to guarantee quarantine or social distancing.
Mucho aprendizaje y
So there was a lot of learning involved, and I think Monica raising her hand.
Otra vez yo, es que
Thank
veo que
you,
va a terminar
Rose,
el
again.
tiempo y no me
Me.
quisiera quedar con la inquietud de tocar el
And
tema del seguimiento. Creo que está
I want to talk about follow-up.
Y que ya lo comentaba anteriormente usted
It
sobre
was
esta
already
etapa
being
de seguimiento.
discussed
Creo que es uno
in
de
the
los
stage of follow-up
que tenemos con respecto
is one of the biggest challenges we have with returns, assisted returns,
prever justo esta fase de
to
seguimiento. Me gustaría saber
provide for any type of monitoring or follow-up. I'd like to know whether you have established a follow-up period or how this works.
Muchas gracias.
So that would be the question.
Claro, muchísimas gracias por la pregunta.
Thank you
Sí,
for
como
your
todas
question.
Naciones Unidas, siempre estamos
As
buscando
the UN, we are trying
evidencia y
to
medir mejor lo que
improve
estamos haciendo para ver qué estamos
our
haciendo,
evidence,
qué
our
creemos que
measurements,
estamos haciendo.
and
Y en el
to
tema
do
de
what we
retorno
think
e
is best.
integración,
And
hemos desarrollado
regarding
un
return and
kit
integration,
de
we have developed a questionnaire,
que
a
aplicamos
toolkit
a
of
los
different
beneficiarios
questionnaires
después de su llegada.
we apply to beneficiaries
Y uno de
after
estos
they
sistemas
return.
es un paquete de reintegración
For
que
example, we're offering a
dura
reintegration package.
creo que es 3 meses,
It
6
is about
meses, algo
3-6
así,
months,
y indaga no solamente si están
and
satisfechos
not
con
only
los personales,
about
sino
satisfaction
si
about
han
the service
logrado
received,
encontrar trabajo, si
or
están
whether
teniendo
they have been
resultados,
able to
etcétera.
find a
Uno
job
de la
or
sostenibilidad
any
de la
issues
integración,
encountered.
son sobre el
So one
rendimiento
would be our performance, but another one would be about the actual sustainability of the reintegration. And when we cannot provide reintegration support, keeping contact is more difficult. Many people, we lose them. They change cell phone numbers. It's a challenge.
en la
in
región
existing programs in the region. There is monitoring
aunque no tienen paquetes de reintegración,
going on.
llamarles entre un
Even
mes.
though there are no reintegration packages, we try to call them after a month,
En los programas sin reintegración,
and we are trying to see what they are lacking in terms of support. And sometimes we see that they want to migrate again.
pero sí hay un paquete
So
y
that
hay
provides added information. And we have an even more complex tool, which is the Sustainability Index
y psicosocial
with psychosocial and other aspects that it's a questionnaire that can be applied to the same person, and then we can compare results. We are trying to adapt it to the region so we can use it here in our local context.
Catalina, no sé si nos queda.
Catalina,
Bueno, estamos con 5 minutos.
we have 5 minutes left, so I think we are reaching the end.
Pensar en próximos pasos,
But
pensar cómo
we would like to think about next steps. What can we do to improve what we did in these situations, make it more sustainable, as Vinicia said, and any other comments you may have.
Veo un manito de Rita, por favor.
I think Rita's hand
Sí,
up.
muchísimas gracias. Justo creo
Thank
que
you.
tratando de aterrizar esta pregunta detonador
Trying
anterior que se hacía
to
sobre
work
retos.
this
Creo que por
trigger
un lado
question
son grandes para
with
poder
others
regional,
for
un poco
the challenges.
solo presentando todo
There are
este
big challenges
complejo que
for the
hay.
region. We have a
Quizás
very
se
complex
desarrollaba más
scenario,
también con este
and it's
contexto de
becoming
pandemia
increasingly
que ya llegamos
complex with
desde
the
el año
pandemic.
pasado. Pero creo que uno de los grandes retos también
But I
es
think that one of the big challenges is to be able to identify
todos estos
or make
marcos que ya
operational
existen
these guidelines
y lograr
or
operacionalizar
frameworks
en cada uno de los países, que
that
cada
we
uno de
can
los
make
países
operational
que
in
formamos parte de
each
esta
of the
COP21
countries,
hagamos propios
that
ayuden a llegar estos instrumentos a las
we
personas
can
¿no? que
have
con
these
las
instruments
migrantes, que son
reach
aquellas que,
those
personas que
who
en
have
términos
contact
de
with migrants
van a identificar estos perfiles
and
y van a
those who
poder
will be able to identify
canalizar
profiles
organizaciones especializadas para dar la
and will
atención
be able to provide
especializada que requieren.
actual
Entonces
reference.
creo que por una parte es muy importante
So
seguir avanzando.
on the one hand, it is very important
Ya
to
se
keep
mencionaba también justo que está como parte de este
working,
grupo de trabajo la
and
creación de
as
estos lineamientos
part
regionales
of
justo para
this work
identificación de
group,
perfiles vulnerables.
we need
Entonces,
to be or
en
keep
algunos
updating
países
regional
donde conozco
frameworks.
es muy importante
So it is
poder
very
adoptar
important to be able to
lineamientos,
adopt
poder implementar estas
these
acciones
guidelines,
estratégicas
implement these
con
strategies,
las
these
personas que se
actions
encuentran en primer contacto. Y por
with
otro lado,
those
están también estos
in
retos
first contact.
de qué hacemos ya que identificamos estos
And
perfiles,
what we
cómo
do
se vinculan cada uno de los estados,
after
cómo,
identification
perdón,
of
las
this,
instituciones de cada uno de los estados,
and
cómo se
how we
para
can
poder
have
identificar
the
y
institution of
proteger a
different
las
states
personas que además tienen
so
perfiles
we
tan
can
diversos
protect
y tan
people, especially those who have
en cada uno de los países de
such
origen o en
diverse
cada uno de
profiles.
los procesos de retorno, ¿no? Entonces es muy
And
importante
it
no
is
solo
very
identificarlos,
important
sino qué vamos a hacer
not only
para
to
poder
identify them,
canalizarlos y
so
protegerlos
how can we
y dar
channel
la
them
atención integral y diferencial
and
que necesitamos.
give the
Muchas gracias.
differentiated
Sí,
assistance that they require.
Es muy retador esa
It is a
vinculación.
big challenge.
La protección a niñez,
There's a big tie-in
a la
with
la
protecting
violencia bajo
children
género, todo el sistema
and
consular.
gender-based
Hay
violence
muchos retos
and the
y
consular system that have
que
other systems that have to be
los cursos
involved,
ojalá que tenemos
and that
disponibles
the courses that we have available regarding
son un recurso
protection and
para
reintegration,
ustedes viendo cómo van a
they are going to
operacionalizar y
be
bajar esos lineamientos a las
another
zonas de primer mundo.
resources.
También ese
And
mapeo
also,
o ese actuar local para
and this
poder
local
personas identificadas a nivel local
actions or actors,
puede existir proveedores de
because
servicios
we
de
can have
de gobierno
NGOs
entonces Gracias por el comentario.
And
Muy
other
importante.
parts, yes. Thank
No
you
sé si
for your great
desea
comment.
comentar.
Anybody else would like to comment?
Creo que es una excelente forma de resumir
It is a
la
great way
conversación.
of summarizing this.
Vamos a dejar aquí las conclusiones para
We
ustedes.
are going
Pasamos
to
al hecho de que migración es un derecho,
leave the
que es parte
conclusions
de
for
los
you.
procesos
Migration
internacionales,
is a
que
right,
forma parte del proceso migratorio y la
human
sostenibilidad,
rights,
la gestión
part
migratorio,
of
que
migration
las
management,
razones diversas
governance,
razones de migrar son
different
razones y
ways
decisiones de retornar,
and reasons
son
for migration,
profundizados en
also
este mensaje y
return,
veamos algunos perfiles de
and
vulnerabilidad.
we see
Además,
other
vimos con un poco más de
vulnerability
detalle
profiles.
las dimensiones de reintegración y
We
cómo
also
hacerlo
saw
sostenible
the
para
dimensions
que las
of
personas puedan tomar
reintegration,
una nueva decisión de
trying
nuevo,
to
no
make them
sentir que es su única opción.
more sustainable.
Siguiente, Catalina. También algunos
And
lineamientos
other
recibidos desde la CRM,
guidelines that we had from
y
RCM
pasaremos a
and
discutir
globally
las
from the
recomendaciones
IOM.
específica de los lineamientos
And
para
we are going to
perfiles de
talk
vulnerabilidad.
about guidelines for vulnerability
Creemos que la
profiles.
cooperación aquí
And I
en la
think that
CRM
this
es realmente
cooperation in the
fundamental
RCM
entre
is
países a nivel de
essential
gobierno, ONGs y colaborantes
at
como
the government level, the government of NGOs, and international organizations such as IOM, trying to have greater
y encontrar
capabilities
más
and
apoyo
sustainability,
para ofrecer
and to have a
y la
more support,
reintegración.
especially for reintegration.
Que todos estamos y
And I
seguimos
think that we are still fighting, and we're trying to have minimum standards so return are safe, decent, proper, and reintegration is sustainable. Thank you for your attention. And Luis Alonso, you have the floor back. And Catarina, thank you so much.
Rose, muchísimas gracias. Yo no estoy levantando la mano.
Thank you, Rose. Yeah, that's really applause, not raising a hand. Excellent dynamic. And we have learned quite a bit. So I'm going to give the floor back again to Gustavo Pineda for the closing remarks. Gustavo?
Luis Alonso, gracias.
Thank you, Luis Alonso.
Ana Catalina, pues ya
Ana Catalina,
como
Rose, as we said, it has been great presentation. We've been really focused, great activities. That was a learning process that was really superlative. We're not only leaving with the knowledge that we need regarding the returns or questions to be able to keep working on them, but we have learning on the use of platforms. And we really want to thank you all for your participation and for this workshop. And now we have to close today's session and this series as well that we've had today. Okay, yeah, or the 22nd, 23rd, and today. I want to thank ARNCOM again, who was facilitating with non-discrimination, the International Committee of the Red Cross. They worked with the use of force, and today the IOM, who for us gave us assisted return within the context of crisis. Thank you for your knowledge and for sharing. And I want to thank the Executive Secretary for their support. And it's great to have Luis Alonso and his team. And also thank our partners and all those who participated. And thank you for all the officers and people who attended, especially regarding the 3 session for the strengthening of public policies, non-discrimination, use of force, and assisted return. And I want to tell you that it is necessary to have practices and standards for cooperation among countries. This type of workshop will allow for it and allow us to have best practices at the international level in the discrimination, use of force, and assisted return. And these are essential. So the RCM, we are working with all member countries and institutions of the countries involved, and we are working in building regional assistance frameworks for migrant populations with a focus on equality. We know migration, it is an issue that has to be regionally addressed. So we are committed to protecting the rights of migrants, and it's an essential principle, of course, is to fight all the prejudices and denigrating expressions, hate, and in this sense, from the working group of regular mass migration that have the honor of coordinating, we exhort all member countries to reinforce the principles of equality, non-discrimination, of protecting migrants, and of course to provide return in full respect of their human rights, and to promote measures to identify profiles and needs for those who require protection and those in vulnerable situations. We hope that this training will have a positive effect and we are able to replicate acquired knowledge and to prevent discrimination in our practices. And of course, the efforts are not ending here. We have another series of activities to keep giving continuity. So, and we need to have this type of exercise because the full exercise of human rights must always be above any political agenda. So all countries in the region should be able to have an exemplary model with inclusion, including reintegration processes under shared responsibility and providing assistance to the whole migration cycle. And of course, this is that has to be, of course, reproduced. I would like to take this opportunity to close this 3-session activity and invite you to the next activities in this group and the other 3 working groups. Thank you for your participation and to all. Thank you. Thank you, Gustavo, and the whole team of the Mexico's PPT, and our support staff, and especially IOM today, and ARNCOM and ICRC for their support. Thank you very much, and see you soon. Remember, in the next week, we will continue with another activity on irregular mass migration with the training program on protection assistance for vulnerable profiles, for for vulnerable migrants. Sorry. Yeah, please register for that training course. Okay.